7 ways Trump could remain president beyond 2028. We're actually talking about beyond January the 20th, 2029. That's the day that Donald Trump's current term of office will end. Legally, for Trump to remain in the White House beyond that day, he has to get around the 22nd Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. The 22nd Amendment limits a U.S. president to 2 elected terms, so no one person can be elected to the office of the president more than twice. Would Donald Trump like to get around that bothersome amendment? What do you think? In a recent interview, Trump said quite candidly that he is now looking for ways to serve a 3rd term. Trump said, in fact, that there are ways to do it. When asked whether he has been presented with plans to allow him to seek a 3rd term, Trump said there were, quote, methods which you could do it. Trump repeatedly posts memes and so-called truths on his Truth Social account, touting himself as a 2028 candidate for president. Reporters observe how he continues to joke about 2028, as he did at the recent White House Correspondents' Dinner. But when asked, Trump says very frankly that he is not joking. And there are more than just a few MAGA devotees who are also dead serious about a 3rd term for Donald Trump. There is, in fact, even a 3rd term project working hard right now, as we speak, to build support for Trump's 3rd term as president. The MAGA base is petitioning Congress to support a constitutional amendment that would give Trump the opportunity to run for a 3rd term. In fact, Congressman Andy Ogles has already introduced a resolution in Congress to amend the 22nd Amendment with language that would enable Trump to be elected to a 3rd term as president. So, here are 7 ways Trump could remain president beyond January the 20th, 2029. And I'm going to throw in for free my humble opinion about how likely each possibility seems to be to me. Number 1, repealing the 22nd Amendment. This is one avenue, but in my opinion, the most impossible of all avenues. It would require a new constitutional amendment to pass through a 2/3 vote in Congress and then be ratified by 38 states. And all this would have to happen in just a couple of years before 2028's election. A constitutional amendment has only been repealed one time in United States history. The 18th Amendment of 1919 was repealed almost 15 years later by the 21st Amendment back in 1933. The 18th Amendment, of course, had established the nationwide ban on the manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcoholic beverages. The 21st Amendment officially ended prohibition. So that's only one repealed amendment since 1791, when the first amendments to the Constitution were ratified. Now, how did we get the 22nd Amendment limiting the U.S. president to 2 terms? Well, George Washington had started the 2-term tradition by stepping down in 1796 after serving his 2 terms. Then, other U.S. presidents followed Washington's example for well over a century. But Franklin Roosevelt broke with tradition, and he won 4 consecutive elections. He was president from 1933 until his death in 1945. FDR was the only U.S. president to serve more than 2 terms. In the 1944 presidential campaign, Republican candidate Thomas Dewey called FDR's 16-year potential rule a threat to freedom. Dewey was the first one to push for a term limit rule for presidents of the United States. And after winning control of Congress in 1947, the Republicans passed the 22nd Amendment to block any future president from holding power for more than 2 terms. The states officially ratified it on February the 27th, 1951. They did it, quote, to prevent a future dictatorship. It's ironic that it was the Republicans that pushed through the 22nd Amendment that now stands as a potential roadblock to Donald Trump running for a 3rd term. Repealing the 22nd Amendment is unrealistic, but we still have 6 more options. Number 2, amending the 22nd Amendment. Now, this is another avenue, an amendment, but in my humble opinion, also a most unlikely avenue. Amending the 22nd Amendment, amending an amendment. U.S. House Representative Andy Ogles has introduced a proposed constitutional amendment on January the 23rd, 2025, called House Joint Resolution 29. It would modify the 22nd Amendment to allow a president to be elected up to 3 times if they served non-consecutive terms. So the language in the text is structured to apply only to non-consecutive terms, which would enable Trump to run for a 3rd term. The language of Ogle's amendment would keep previous 2 consecutive term presidents like Bill Clinton, George Bush, and Barack Obama from being eligible to run again. So it would keep them from running, but not Donald Trump. But this tactic by Trump's supporters does not have a snowball's chance in a hot furnace. Number 3, a U.S. president could remain in power after 2 terms by being elected vice president. In other words, Trump could run as the vice presidential running mate on a 2028 ticket, and the presidential candidate could be one of Trump's lackeys who would agree to step down after they won the election and took office. The 22nd Amendment says no person can be elected to the office of the president more than twice. It does not say that no one can be elected vice president and then succeed into the presidency. So after the ticket wins and they take office, the newly elected president could immediately resign, and then Trump could ascend back into the Oval Office through the line of succession. Now, there is one potential obstacle to this scenario. Legal opinion differs on whether the 12th Amendment to the Constitution would disqualify a 2-term president from being eligible to fill the office of vice president. The 12th Amendment, which of course predates the 22nd Amendment, states that no person ineligible to the office of president shall be eligible to be vice president. But the legal question is, would the 2-term president be ineligible to the office of president since he did not run to be elected president more than twice? No doubt the Supreme Court would have to make that decision. But I think this scenario is also unlikely. But it is possible if Trump could get the full cooperation of the Supreme Court and a totally loyal running mate willing to hand over the Oval Office as agreed upon. Now, number 4. The Presidential Succession Act of 1947 places the Speaker of the House next in line to the presidency after the Vice President. And the U.S. Constitution does not require the Speaker of the House to actually be a member of Congress. So the Speaker of the House does not have to be a member of the House to be elected Speaker of the House. So in other words, Trump could have a Republican majority in the House of Representatives elect him as Speaker if the GOP can keep the majority. Then the sitting president and vice president, who would also have to be two of Trump's GOP lackeys, they could then simultaneously resign, turning the presidency over to the Speaker, Donald Trump. I also find this scenario to be very unlikely, even more unlikely than the previous scenario. Now, here is number 5, the shadow presidency. And this is a very real possibility. And in my humble opinion, this one is a scenario by which Trump could actually retain absolute power without holding the official title of president. Trump has absolute sway over the Republican Party. If a hand-picked, completely compliant GOP lackey won the presidency in 2028, Trump could then be officially appointed White House Chief of Staff or White House Senior Advisor or be given some such similar title. And Trump could then carry on as the real head of the White House, running all cabinet meetings, making all the policy decisions, commanding the administration from behind the scenes, while the nominal elected president would act as the official figurehead of the administration. So that is now 5 ways that we have looked at that Trump could remain president beyond January the 20th, 2029. Some totally unrealistic, and maybe not all. But there are 2 other ways that I still want us to look at, and in my opinion, these are the more likely scenarios. Now, some of you might like to share your thoughts about other ways that Trump might remain president. And you can share those thoughts in our comments. But you know, it's typical for us to think that a president could use the excuse of war or a domestic emergency to hold on to power and to suspend elections. But a U.S. president cannot legally remain in power past 2 terms using war as an excuse. The Constitution does not allow a president to cancel elections or extend his term of office because of an ongoing war. And a U.S. president cannot legally remain in power past 2 terms using martial law or emergency powers as an excuse either. The U.S. Constitution sets fixed limits and strict limits that cannot be overridden by any kind of emergency declaration. Nor can a U.S. president remain in power even by invoking the Insurrection Act. But let's look at number 6 and number 7, 2 more ways that Trump could remain president beyond January the 20th, 2029. Number 6, the 22nd Amendment bans anyone from being elected president more than twice. But right now, a legal challenge is in the works to test that amendment in the courts. The 22nd Amendment is being challenged as to whether or not that amendment refers to 2 presidential terms under any circumstances or only to 2 consecutive presidential terms. So, there is a legal challenge in the works right now regarding the 22nd Amendment, a legal challenge brought by Trump supporters. The justices of the Supreme Court will possibly be the ones to settle this, making it clear whether or not the 22nd Amendment will allow Trump to run for a 3rd term. Now, number 7. Could a U.S. president remain in power after 2 terms if he usurped authority and violated the Constitution and ignored the courts and ignored the Congress and used military power that obeyed him? A U.S. president could remain in power under that scenario, as it describes a successful military coup d'etat where constitutional law is entirely overthrown by force of arms. Dictatorships rely on physical control, not on legal text. If the military obeys the president over the Constitution, then the legal system fails. The Constitution becomes unenforceable if those with weapons refuse to obey it. U.S. service members swear to defend the Constitution and not a specific person. Troops are legally required to disobey illegal orders, including keeping a term-limited president in power. But if the generals are lackeys of the president, if they are obedient servants of the president, the commander-in-chief, if the military obeys the president rather than the Constitution, then he stays in power. This final scenario is a very real possibility. If a president is in power who puts himself above the law and considers his own personal ambitions to be paramount, if he is a man of dishonorable character who puts himself above everything else, if he is a vile cheat and a despicable person, he could do this. Have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather reprove them. That's Ephesians 5:11. In other words, have nothing to do with fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. Thanks for watching this video to its end. Good friend, we believe we are living in the last days before the second coming of our Lord Jesus. Are you ready to meet the Lord? The Lord could take you or me out of this world today. My old heart could stop beating today, or yours. Are you at peace with God through Jesus Christ? Please watch our short 8-minute video, How to Be Absolutely Sure You Will Go to Heaven.